That's why we established a freedom of conscience. It's not for the group. That's why one dissenting individual, a Quaker, can say, hey, I'm opposed to war. We say, okay, we let you off. I'm opposed to taking an oath. Okay, you can just do an affirmation. Throughout American history, we allowed dissenters individually because of conscience. That's a one-on-one. We did the same with freedom of religion. You have a right to practice your religion, not only as a group, but as an individual. All the way through, it was individuals. And what's so cool is it was preachers who did that. Those guys who came, I mean, the first Constitution we ever have written in the history of the country, 1638, the Reverend Thomas Hooker, who said, oh, wait a minute, God gave us a written word so that every one of us can go to His word and know exactly what He wants. We're going to do a written Constitution so every one of you can go to the government, know what the contract is. 3 years later, the Reverend Nathaniel Ward did the first written Bill of Rights. He said, wait a minute, we need to have a limitation so the government can't get into our individual rights. So we're doing a written Bill of Rights.
This has never been done before.
Never. This is brand new stuff.
These are not from the scholars per se, that we would look at. These were from the religious figures.
That's right.
Of America. Okay.
The religious leaders.
When we come back, I want to tell you a little bit more specifically the stories of these guys, and then I want to ask you to get involved because you may be the one that makes the difference. Back in a minute. I've been thinking about the civil rights movement, and any real movement in this country has always been a spiritual movement. The end of slavery, all of it. And it took extraordinary people that had their values and their principles in line. David Barton is back with me. And David, we've been talking about something that was called the Black Regiment and later became known as the Black Robe Brigade, right. The preachers of America. There was a revival in about 1640 in America, and it took off, and the British said this was the reason the revolution happened. Would it have gone through, do you believe, if it hadn't been for the preachers?
We would have had something, but not looking like what we have today.
More like France?
It would look a lot more like France. It would look like Europe. That's exactly. Okay. And we're the only country in the world that does not average a revolution every 30 to 40 years. Right. I like that.
And again, this is because the difference is individual rights.
That's right.
Not collective
That's
rights.
Exactly right.
Okay. So tell me who some of these people were.
Great example. Let me take a preacher in Virginia in 1776. He pastored 2 churches in a little rural town. He was also a member of the legislature, John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg. While in Williamsburg, the British came marching into town. No big deal because we haven't signed the Declaration yet. We're still British colonies. But they started going in private homes, taking things, especially guns and ammunition. And so Patrick Henry said, no way. Patrick Henry got 5,000 farmers to go get the 200 British soldiers, get all their stuff back. But Pastor Muhlenberg on the other side of the state, his churches, he thinks, my guys need to hear about this. So he jumps on horseback, rides all the way back. He preaches a sermon Sunday morning, January 21st, 1776. His side of the state doesn't know what's happening with the British. He's in the pulpit, and he's in his black robes, his clerical robes, and he's preaching from Ecclesiastes 3 to everything. There's a time, purpose, season. Gets to verse 8, time of peace and a time of war. When he read that, he said, brethren, he said, this is no longer a time of peace. This is now a time of war. And he gave them the news flash. And, of course, they're all, oh, my gosh, what do we do? He then, instead of doing what he always did, have a dismissal prayer, go to the vestry room, disrobe, he started undressing right in front of the congregation. And much to their shock, they'd never seen that. But when he jerked off his clerical robes, underneath he's wearing the full dress uniformed officer in the Continental Army. He then dismounted the pulpit, went to the back of the church, and he preached as he went. He said, we came here to practice our liberties, and if we don't get involved, we're going to lose our liberties. Now, who's going with me to defend them? 300 men got up and met him at the back of the church.
Okay, now here's an interesting part of the story, because he understood individual liberty, but his brother said, right, can't be involved. I want to introduce you to the brother next. We're back with David Barton. By the way, to learn more about the forgotten history stories, check out David's DVD set, The American Heritage Series, available at wallbuilders.com. All right, we're talking about the Black Regiment, which is now known as the Black Robe Brigade. Right. They were responsible for the revolution, according to the British, and I mean, everything I read.
And John Adams and other founders as well.
Right. Samuel Adams was... we're going to do a special tomorrow or Friday on Samuel Adams for Founders Friday. You're joining us for that, are you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. Let me show you the Muhlenberg. Muhlenberg. This is the guy, he was the preacher in Virginia, that he's here. This is the statue of him in the Capitol where he's taking off the robe after he preached his sermon and said, let's go, boys. But he had a brother.
He had a brother.
Show the brother here and tell me his story.
His brother is Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg, who pastored up in New York City. And when Pastor Frederick in New York City heard what his brother Peter had done, he said, wrong. You should stay in the pulpit. Church shouldn't get involved in this stuff. And that's what his brother believed until the British came marching into New York City in 1777, threw him out of his church. And as he stood outside, they desecrated his church. And he has this epiphany. He says, maybe I ought to get involved as well, or I'm going to lose my liberties. And so he decides to get involved. He actually ends up being the Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania, helps write their original Constitution, and he is the first ever Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. There's only 2 signatures on the bottom Bill of Rights, and one is his, the Reverend Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. And significantly, his brother had become a major general in the Revolution by that time, one of Washington's top generals.
Okay, so David, I guess what I'm introducing here to America, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that we are a nation of religious people, of morals, of God. This is his land, his rights.
Yeah.
He was instrumental, but it took people with a spine to stand up.
Did.
And it wasn't about politics.
No.
They were not standing in the church, because I would leave a church that starts talking to me about politics.
Yeah.
It's not about who to vote for, what party to be in. This is about individual rights, not human rights. I'm getting a lot of heat from churches now because of Jim Wallace, and he says, you know, social justice, it's what Jesus would have.
That's collective rights. Jesus was not into collective rights. He didn't die for the world in large. He died for every single individual. When you go theological belief.
When you go up to be judged, he's not like Beck party of 10,
that's right.
Beck party of 10. It's one.
It's individually. He keeps track individually. And that's what was so unique about America, is we had this concept of individual. Now we're getting collective. That is socialistic Marxism.
And social justice has been out for the last century, started in the 20s, and I know you have.
Yeah, here's a sermon. I mean, we used to have some backbone in churches, and we've allowed ourselves to be compartmentalized into a little bitty thing, and the government tells us what we can talk about. We've let the IRS get in. We had a lot of courage before. We said, no. And so here's a sermon talking about the evils of social justice, how it's creeping into the churches, how it perverts doctrine, perverts belief. And it really goes back to a couple of guys who started what's social gospel movement. You know, Harry Ward and Reinhold Niebuhr are the 2 guys that brought that in. And that was a dangerous thing for churches. And now we've let ourselves become completely irrelevant. And so we wonder why numbers are sliding in the polls for our kids.
America, do your homework. We'll try to help you as much as you can. But this is a collective effort on individual rights.
That's right.
Back in a minute. You know, the main thing we need to do is just be a better people, better men, better women, better children. Samuel Adams said, and I want you to tweet this, "The public cannot be too curious concerning the character of public men." Gee, I thought character didn't matter. That's from Sam Adams. You'll learn about him, Faith and Virtue, this Friday on Founding Fathers Friday, 5 to 6. See you tomorrow from New York. Good night.